Welcome to our video training on ministry compensation, what every pastor needs to know. I'm Marshall Shannon with Ministry Design Training. It may be one of the most uncomfortable and sometimes the most contentious things we do and the most difficult question we have to answer as churches and our congregations. How much should we pay our pastoral staff? Pastors struggle between their commitment to be self-sacrificing and, on the other hand, to provide for their families. Congregations want to attract the most capable leaders and retain them, and they wrestle with declining giving contributions and tightening budgets. As I said before in other training times, 85% of the churches in North America are either plateaued or in decline. And you find yourself with shrinking resources to properly care for your staff. And so personnel and pastor search committees find it bewildering the number or amount of information that is available on the bookshelves and online with charts and compensation and suggestions. And those of you that are carrying as a finance committee, a pastoral relations committee, a budget committee, wrestle with the same information. How do you go about caring for your staff so that they can take care of their families and not be worrying and fretting over their finances so they can give full attention to their ministry, both to your church and to the community? On the website hissheep.org is an article written that includes a survey conducted by Leadership Magazine. It revealed some interesting things about pastors today, about their work, their home, and their lifestyles. So let me just zero in on their compensation. The research said that 22% of pastors surveyed were seeking supplemental income to make ends meet. 28% felt that their current compensation was inadequate. 69% of pastor spouses work outside the home to make ends meet. The top problems in clergy's marriages were the following: insufficient time, the use of money, income levels, communication difficulties, and congregational expectations. Look in the middle of the 5 things listed: use of money, income levels. What this is saying to me is that the majority of pastors, because of their level of their pay packages or the way they're structured, are looking for more income, and they're just trying to survive as they find a way to generate more revenue. Well, we have an opportunity to help churches fix that through adequate training and interaction with us. So let me take care of a couple of housekeeping details here. First, you can pause this video and scroll down and you'll find 2 things. One, you'll find resources where I've put a number of resources there, guides, books that have been written, websites, where you'll find where we have gathered together over 30 years now, information to help myself while I pastored and while I trained other pastors while I was a senior pastor, and now, of course, serving for the last decade as a ministry coach. You'll find resources there that will help you to answer the questions that we're talking about today. Whether you're a pastor who is leading your church or you're a lay leader who is trying to take care of your pastoral staff, whether it's a solo pastor or multi-staff, and you have pastors and then support staff with that, perhaps facility managers and custodial and maintenance people who are helping you, what I'm teaching today and what others have taught me how to teach can be applied to your church. We're going to give you a process for figuring out how to do this. So we want you to be able to move forward as you do and care for your church staff. So as we go through this, we want to answer several questions. And one, as we talk about what every pastor needs to know about paying their staff and themselves. If you have a question while we're talking about this, you can scroll down below the resources and be able to ask a question, but do not click submit until you have finished watching the video, because it will start the video back over again. The other housekeeping duty that I want to make sure you understand, I'm speaking to you as a person who has been in two areas of ministry. One is as a senior pastor, and two is as a ministry coach. I do not intend for this to be legal advice. I am not a tax attorney, and I am not a CPA, a certified public accountant. I do not come at it from that approach. I will give you information where you can go find those who have written technically about this. And so as I do this, this is meant to help senior pastors and help lay leaders in the church to navigate their way through, and to help pastors negotiate, and to help the committees negotiate with the pastor to come up with the fair compensation where they can continue to serve so that God can be honored, Christ exalted, and souls won to Christ and to make disciples. We're going to look to discuss this in two parts today. In part one, we're going to answer how to navigate the compensation process, and two, how to negotiate your compensation package. Both of those have to be done every year. And so because we're coming across these, whether your situation is that you've been considering a call to a church, or maybe you're just starting out at your church, or you're a church planner who's trying to figure out how to design and structure your finance committee or budget committee or pastoral relations committee, how you want to set up a process for dealing with this, you have to do it every year. Or you're one who's been serving for some years at your present church, and they don't seem to understand that as your family grows and matures, and now you've got kids in high school and in college, that you need more money today than you've ever needed to take care of the rising cost of caring and educating your children. Or maybe you've got some new events in your family with health problems, but for some reason your church has maybe been giving you just even below a yearly cost of living raise. Whatever your situation, it is our intent for you to apply what we're teaching so it can help you navigate the process and negotiate your package. So as we go through this, there are several things that you're going to have to answer. So what exactly is a church and staff to do to navigate the process? Well, I believe that we can summarize it in three things. First is the church, pastor you, but the church needs to make certain it has a developed and adopted theology of compensation. Secondly is an organized system, so you know what the steps are. Thirdly is a safe environment so that there can be open discussion between the staff, church staff, and the committee that is overseeing this, whatever the body is, and whether you call yourself a committee or a team, however your polity is set it up, and you've decided to delegate to a person or persons to deal with pastoral compensation, church staff compensation. So we're going to go through these three things to answer the first question about how to navigate the process. In answering this, to develop your theology of compensation, I believe you need to answer the following questions. Matter of fact, as I prepared this, I had to answer these questions as I began to put together how to train. First, why train your church on this topic? Well, part of the answer, I believe, why we're teaching you this today, is this is a common occurrence. I mean by that, it's an annual event that makes pastors and church leaders uncomfortable. Sometimes the process or event is contentious. Often it is an experience that nobody looks forward to. You can't wait till the fall to get here, or whenever your fiscal year starts, and you've got months before that you're putting together your budget. And so it puts everybody in an awkward position. And so because of this, we want you to understand and be able to make certain that, first off, you understand why you want to teach your church to do this. Now, pastors, you know you've got a responsibility in Ephesians 4 to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And so because we have to do this annually, a church is wise to understand why. Why do you pay people? So let me ask you this question. You've got to decide which baseline method you should use to determine the pay packages, because there's all kinds of methods there. So let me just read a couple to you. Bill Wilson, who is the president or was the president of the Center for Congregational Health, says that there's a wide range of sizes and financial health, as well as demographic and cultural contexts and ministers' years of service. So there's all kinds of criteria that you can find out there to be methods and baseline methods to ground and found as a foundation for pay packages. Many people refer to surveys such as the National Association of Church Business Administration. You can buy a subscription to their package to help you as a baseline, and they'll walk you through it. Christianity Today has put out for years, for at least a decade, the compensation handbook for church staff. They're updated regularly. They survey thousands of churches and thousands of pastors, and they look at salary, retirement benefits, health insurance coverage, housing and parsonage allowance, life insurance benefits, continuing educations, and they profile the positions which are included but not limited to a senior or lead pastor, associate and assistant pastors, executive and administrative pastors, youth pastors, adult ministry pastors, non-ordained, and their compensation handbook for church staff is updated annually and can be ordered from your church resource. We give that information to you at the close of our time so you can find it, and it's a part of your resources. They look at a number of areas. They look at church income, church attendance, the setting, whether it's urban or rural, pastors' years of service and education, plus any additional circumstances, such as the cost of living in your area, the local economy, pastoral performance, the workload, goodwill, and history of the previous raises for pastors and other staff. So as you go through and look at this, you've got to make some choices. Are you going to use the National Association of Church Business Administration's offering for a baseline, or Christianity Today? Or what about the national averages that are put together by different denominations where they do research? Some of that research has shown that the range of pastor salaries, senior pastor salaries, ranges in the low 80,000s to the 110, 112,000. But, do you just take that as your baseline? Many of them assume that what they have budgeted from their last minister will suffice. So say the pastor before you had been there 15 years, and they just pick up and go, well, what we were paying him his last year should be fine for what we'll pay our new pastor. Some churches have tied their senior pastor's salary to what teachers make, or what a school principal makes, or what a CEO or a middle manager makes at a nonprofit in your area. So you've got all these options, but one of the questions in developing your theology of compensation is to understand why you would have one, why you would need to train someone, and which baseline method are you going to use to determine the pay packages? Are you going to try and blend some together? Then what is the responsibility of the church and its leaders? Well, I believe that it's the responsibility of the church and the leaders to get this thing right. You've got to steward this annual event responsibility, and the bottom line is and others have said this, like Tom Rainer. It says churches do not do their homework on pastoral compensation tend to underpay their pastors. So we want to come close to doing what is right, but you've got to come up with some way to know what the baseline is, the foundation, to start building your packages for your individual employees in your church, both pastoral, administrative, support staff, facility care with your managers and maintenance, custodial. And if you've got all these different people that you're paying, how are you going to determine what to pay them? And do you want to have a process set up that helps them be able to know about what they should be paid? How you do this, you determine that as a church, but you're not likely going to hear a pastor announce in his resignation that he is leaving because of financial pressures. The reality is, for a number of pastors, the issue of compensation is a major push from one church to another, or from the church to a secular vocation. It's not that the pastor is in his job for the money. It's that the compensation for his career or vocation is insufficient to meet his family needs. Those realities may be responsible for a recent reduction in the stigma historically associated with financial negotiations between a pastor and a search committee. It's still a fine line to walk. You've got to figure these things out. Ministers know that transitions are the primary time for making salary adjustments. The only wise, real raise many clergy ever get is when they move. And so for years, guys have moved because someone comes along and offers them a little more money. And I have been there as a senior pastor myself. And so instead of putting your current staff in that position, realize that they may never say anything to you, but are praying and hoping that you will take into account their needs based on their individual family and based on your economy. And so what is the responsibility of the church and its leaders? It's to get this thing right. So we want you to lead and work together with your lay leaders and your paid staff, your teams and congregation to address these matters and make it a pleasant part of your annual budgeting and not something that is contentious or uncomfortable for people. And I always found it to be uncomfortable, and it could get contentious. So let's move to the next question. Who is this to help? So a part of your theology of compensation is to fully understand and write it down. Who is this going to help? Well, it's going to help pastors and other paid employees of the church, but it's also going to help churches and can be a part of helping the nonprofits that you support and deal with. So it's going to help the community, the church, and your church staff. And you've got to decide what you're trying to accomplish. Well, you want to help pastors and their staffs. And you want to help them fulfill their calling and their role in your church without undue concerns over present and future financial needs. In other words, steward your staff to further the cause of Christ. Be good to them. Be fair with them. Take care of them. You want to free them from financial anxiety so they can focus on the calling that God has given them. All of this really is a byproduct of good stewardship on the church's part. And you want the ability to attract and keep qualified staff members? Then do this part well. Simply a good pay package is the right thing to do. It is a good part of stewardship responsibilities as a church family. A fair pay package compensates the pastor for their investment in their education, along with their skill set, their experience, and the hard work that they're putting in. A well-structured benefit package can protect all involved from potential setbacks, their life, health, and disability, and other issues. And so if you compensate them fairly and they feel like you have been fair to them and you are showing your love and care and appreciation for them, this can serve as a management and motivational tool to reward staff for meeting agreed upon goals and for meeting the work requirements of their post. It can serve to encourage them in their heart and soul that the work they're doing, that God's people, their church family, who they're living a sacrificial life for and striving day and night, 7 days a week, trying to help you further the cause of Christ. And so why develop pay packages for your staff? Well, you want to create fair packages and you want to compensate them fairly. But why are you doing that? And so you might want to answer, what does the Bible have to say about this? So let me just run down through several Bible passages, and you're going to have to answer, how do you interpret what the Bible has to say? Well, theology is about Scripture and how you interpret it and pull it all together so you can state in a concise and clear way why you do what you do, how you do what you are to do, when you are to do it, who is to do it. You answer all the W's and the H. So 1 Timothy 5, verses 17 through 18 says, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. Well, what's your interpretation of that? I believe, let me just give you, as I prepare this, my interpretation. I believe God's perspective is that pastoral staff are worthy of double honor. God's perspective is to transform our perspective so our thinking and attitude leads to right actions. What about 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 12 to 13? We ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord, and admonish and to esteem them very highly in love because of their work. So how do you interpret that? Well, I think God's perspective is that your pastor is worthy of respect and love, appreciation. What about 1 Corinthians 9:14? It says, in the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. Interpretation? God's prescription is to pay for ministry. So God wants those who are serving you to earn their living by their service. What about Galatians 6:6? One who is taught the word must share all good things with the one who teaches. Interpretation? God's prescription plan is that those who are ministered to are to pay for those who are doing the ministering. So, if you continue on down the Scripture, and there is no shortage of passages and verses and Bible teaching writings by the authors to help us ground our theology and come to some conclusion about this thing of ministry compensation. Romans 4:4. Now to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. So whatever translation you primarily use, you've got to go through this and study it, determine what it means and how you interpret it, then how you're going to develop your theology of compensation. Jeremiah 22, verse 13, woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness and his upper rooms by injustice, who makes his neighbor serve him for nothing and does not give him his wages. Malachi 3:5. Then I draw near for you for judgment. I will be a swift witness against those who oppress the hired worker in his wages, says the Lord of hosts. Luke 10:7. For the laborers deserve his wages. Matthew 20:1 through 15. Not going to read the whole thing there, but it says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of the house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day. Did you catch that? after agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, after agreeing. So when you begin to take these passages and others, how are you going to develop your theology of compensation? If there is no agreement, alignment, and attunement of God's people in your church family, both the leadership and the congregation, you have not come to a clear understanding, you're going to find that you're going to have contention, and you're going to have hard feelings, and you're going to have 2 sets or 3 sets of thinking about what is right. Before you set up your process, your system, the first thing you need to develop is your theology of compensation. What does God think about this? What does the Scripture say? And how do you interpret it? And what does that mean when it comes to the whole ball of wax about ministry compensation for your staff of your church? So secondly, we go from dealing with developing your theology of compensation. In order to navigate the process, there has to be a system. You need to design and develop your system. So I'm laying groundwork here for you of 3 key things that need to happen before you begin to negotiate your individual pay package, and before the church works with you to do that. So here are some suggested steps for creating your system or your process. First, create your compensation team or your committee. You may call it any number of things. It might be a budget committee. It might be a finance committee. It could be the lay leaders, whether it's a board, but it's a group of people, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who are commissioned with the responsibility to help recommend or establish or set the compensation packages for every employee in your church. Well, you've got to create a team, and in doing that, there are 4 steps that I'm going to recommend that you do this. One is that you've got to structure your team, and that you've got to answer how many people are going to be on it, what are the individual job descriptions, how are they organized, what are their duties, how will the members work together, how are you going to structure them. And so you need to have an operational manual that sets up and clearly defines, because if you don't, you may run into trouble when they don't understand how they're put together. So there should be perhaps an organizational chart that clearly states who the committee answers to, who on the committee answers to what chairman and vice chairman, what are the roles of every person, what are their duties, is this a big enough church that you're going to need to break it into subcommittees, and even thirdly into work groups who go and do research and come back with their information or recommendations. And so as you do this, you've got to structure your team. Then you've got to select your team. So let me ask you, who are you going to select? What qualifications do they need to have? They need to be in alignment and attunement and in agreement, and they, for instance, need to support the church and the staff and be in agreement with who's there, and they need to be in full agreement with head, heart, and hands and actively serving and be in agreement with the church values and mission and vision and strategic plan. In other words, they need to be people who are in full agreement with who the church is, what the church is called to do, how it's called to do it, and where the church is headed. You want to select a team, for instance, that has the right shape. Each individual team person that you would consider putting on your church compensation team it has a certain shape. By shape, I mean that they are spiritually gifted, and are they gifted for the task at hand? Has God gifted them maybe with the gift of discernment or tact or mercy or administration? But you discern what their spiritual gift is. Secondly, and it's an acrostic shape, SHAPE, what's their heart? What's their passion? Do they have concern for the staff? Do they interact with them and a concern for the church and a concern for the community and the world? Because how you deal with your staff and interact with them goes a long way toward helping you accomplish your ministry, your calling as a church body. So do they have a passion for this, or are you making them do it because they're a warm body and you know you've got to take care of this annual event, and so who's willing to serve this year on the compensation committee? Well, what about their abilities and skill sets? Have they deployed those and you can see what they are, or have you tested them? And so that's the A. The P is their personality. When you'd run a DISC profile on them, what kind of personality do they have? And by the way, we've got other training for this. How do you build a team, period? How do you know that they work together? And so as you deal with this, you want to select the right person in their shape. Personality types work together in a certain way. If you get the wrong personality, you'll have clashes and contention and conflict and hard feelings. It will grind your process to a halt, and it won't work. It's like a ball team that has people on it, and you've got the wrong people on the field at the same time, or on your club, on your team, and it blows up on you, and it doesn't make you effective. You certainly don't win like you should. So look at the personalities. Here's the last thing of shape, is their experience. You say, why does that matter? They can have a heart for this. They can be spiritually gifted. They can even have good skill sets, abilities, and have a good personality that meshes well chemistry-wise with others, so you can have an effective compensation team. But if their experience does not help them understand how to set pay packages, or they're not willing to learn how, you may really grind this whole process to a halt. So you're either going to have to dig into this and use some of the guides we recommend, or you're going to have people who are C-level, meaning they're CEOs, COOs, CFOs, CIOs. They're people who have been chief something, maybe owning a company or at the top of a company, and have been responsible for setting pay packages and understand all the components and all the ins and outs of it. But you're going to have to select a team to do this. Then after you've done that and you put together your team so they can work effectively together, then you're going to have to school your team. You're going to have to educate and equip your team. Well, you've got to decide how you're going to train them. Who will train them? When will you train them? What support will you give them? Who will they answer to? So as you do this, who's going to train them and show them? You're going to do a manual and hand it to them. You're going to do video training like I'm doing and have them watch it. You're going to meet with them Tuesday nights, or early Monday morning or Sunday afternoon. I mean, when and where and how and who and why and so forth. How are you going to educate them? You can't structure and select them and not prepare them. At least you shouldn't. And here's the last thing. You can't just leave them alone with it either. You've got to support the team that you have structured and selected and equipped for the task at hand. Someone has to take responsibility to stay on top of this so they're not left to their own. You want to encourage them, exhort them, continue to equip and educate them. They may serve every year for a while if you want them to, because they want to, because it was such a wonderful experience to interact with the staff and to pray through this. And really it can be a time of refreshment and renewal and invigorate everyone about the calling and God's gift of these special people. Go back to Ephesians 4, verse 8. Christ gives these gifted people to the church, and you stop and look at your pastoral staff and your support staff and your facility staff and any other people that you've got employed, and you recognize them. Maybe you're evaluating them, and you're encouraging your staff. Your compensation team can help propel your ministry forward if they do their jobs right, as I envision it. And so as you go through this, you've created this team. Here's the second suggested step. Who, decide who will decide. Who's going to decide your theology of compensation and how you're going to put together your team? Who will determine your policies, your procedures, and your practices? This is where your theology of compensation comes into play. You're going to decide who's going to decide. This is where developing a new ministry, the training that we provide, will help you put together your policies, your procedures, your employee manual. This really is a new ministry if you're doing this for the first time and creating a compensation team to do this. Well, you're going to have a whole bunch of points and questions that you need to answer to put this together. But who's going to decide this? The pastoral staff, the lay leadership, a combination of both? And who will create your employee handbook and compensation process? A compensation process or an employee handbook should give a step-by-step process with policies, procedures, rules and regulations. They're to be in place for the current, the existing, the present staff, and future employees to know what to expect and how to proceed. Let me talk to you about something that churches just struggle with. And as they struggle with this, the business world calls it onboarding and offboarding, meaning onboarding is when you bring someone into your church as an employee for the first time and they're coming into your church and then they're there for a season of time and then they're going to leave your church. They're going to leave your church because they want to, because you want them to, or because the Lord moved them out. In some way, everybody has a finish line for a ministry at your church. They're going to die. They're going to retire. They're going to move away. They're going to go to another church. They're going to, somehow. So as you go through this, who is going to decide how you're going to bring people in, what you're going to deal with them during the time, and how you're going to see them leave? Onboarding and offboarding. Well, you need to have policies and procedures and practices that are set up as a normal part of your church. And people need to know what they are and what the culture of the church is toward this and how you're going to deal with this. Well, here's another practice. Who's going to decide on the baseline you will use to determine salaries? Now we're back to the list I gave you earlier, so let me go through this. An online service is provided through the NACBA, the National Association of Church Business Administration. It's either .com or .org. And the second one by CTI, Christianity Today, the Compensation Handbook for Church Staff. It provides information from surveys on the roles, the different positions of church staff, and the years they've been employed, denominations, regions, education, and other stuff. You have surveys that are available for national averages. You've got the status quo, what we paid our last pastor. You've got industry professionals that you can compare them to, and you just track what teachers are paid, what the school administrators are paid, or what a CEO of a nonprofit is paid. Or you set up a system. I'll give you as a resource, and it will be both on this presentation and in the resource section, a book by Carl Herbster and Jim Dewing. And in their book, they wrote it for Christian schools, but they provide a formula for the hierarchy for senior pastors and administrators, and you could apply that formula to how you set individual pay packages. Well, who is going to decide this as you develop your system? By the way, the system that Carl Herbster and Jim Dewing, and I know both men, they're both very fine men, and as they wrote the book some years ago and put this together, I had one pastor friend of mine, as we talked about this, he said, our men looked at the formula, but it really didn't fit our church. Well, they had to look at how they were going to set up their formula, and you've got to do the same thing. You've got to look and see how you're going to determine it. The more concise and clear and fair the process you develop is, the more legitimate and appreciated it will be. so that your staff, your compensation team, can look at this, and there's going to be some wiggle room in it, whatever you probably decide, to help your staff realize. And you can set this up as you want to, but I can tell you this, given time and attention to this will help further the cause of Christ. I believe it in my soul, and I have seen it happen in my experience as a ministry coach and as a senior pastor. So you have a number of baselines or formulas and options as to how you're going to figure the baseline and then work it up or work it down for your staff. So how are you going to decide, for instance, what you got a baseline? I'm just using that as an example. Are you going to add their experience and their performance and their workload and their education to determine how much more you pay them than the baseline? Or are you going to do it by taking the pastor's pay and the next guy is an executive pastor, an associate pastor, assistant pastor, a director of some ministry, and you work your way through the pastoral staff, the support staff, the administration staff of your secretarial pool, or the business administrators, however you categorize them in this, and it can be done different from church to church, or your facility staff, or any other staff you've got if you've got a school. You can figure from the bottom up and from the top down, but who's going to decide this? Now, while you're doing this, I certainly would include your staff in it. So you've got to decide who will decide as you create your team, your theology of compensation, as you create your system. Decide who will decide. Now, here's the third thing that I've given to you about how to navigate the process. You really want to develop, I believe, a safe environment. Develop a culture that provides a safe environment for your church staff and your compensation members, your team, to communicate together. It is one thing for you to develop an organized process for determining individual pay packages. You want to then create a safe culture, because while you have an organized system, it is another thing altogether to create a safe place for them to openly communicate and trust their leaders, their team members, to properly care for them. Folks, I've been there. For 18 years, I was a senior pastor from a church that had 15, 20 people in it into 400 or 500 people. And as we did this and ended up with multiple staff, it helps immensely when there is a safe environment, a safe place for you to talk. Because you may be the kind that doesn't want to say anything to anyone about your needs and your wants. We'll get to that in a moment. You might be the kind that has one competent that you're going to talk to, one person that has your confidence, and you're going to talk to them, and then they go and talk like a little birdie in someone's ear. Or you may have an open interview with the compensation team committee to talk about your individual wants and needs. We'll get to some of that in a moment. But let me tell you, it is a blessing when there is a safe environment for people to talk about their wants and needs and hopes and visions for their family. And not to feel like if they speak very honestly and frankly that they're going to be, punched for doing so. So you want to make the pastors and your staff feel safe. You want to assure them of your appreciation and desire to take care of them and their families. You want to show them that you care, and you do this by taking care of them. So put Matthew 22 to work. Put it into action. Matthew 22, verse 35 through 40 says this, and I'm just picked up one of my Bibles here, the Discovery Bible, and reading from it to you. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. So the lawyer speaking to Christ. Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Well, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Here is a chance for you to apply the scriptural teaching and live out be a little Christ, a Christian, and handle them with the same attitude and actions that you would want to have happen to you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. Live out the scriptures. So take your theology of compensation you've developed and now flesh it out. Live it out. Put it into action. Take care of them. Well, how are you going to negotiate your pay? And this is probably the question that everybody wanted to get to. It may have been why you invested the money in this series, training series, because you really wonder, I have a family. There's 5 of us in our family. My wife and I, our 3 kids. I've got a junior hire, a senior hire, and a sophomore in college. And we're at the height of our need for financial resources, and I need a compensation package that helps me in every way. Part 2 of this series gets into the compensation components, and we deal with vacation, a lot of the things that you might not think about that could be very important to your pastoral staff and others who are employed by your church that they may need at certain seasons of your life. So here's the first thing. Whether you like it or not, you've got to be your own best advocate. You want to be your best own advocate. You have, I believe, the right and really responsibility to negotiate your pay package, to care for your family. Matter of fact, the scriptures, I think, get kind of blunt about a man who doesn't take care of his family is not suitable to lead the family of God. And so you want to pray and prepare and then put into action certain things. So how are you going to do this? Well, number one, you've got to speak up for yourself. So what does that mean? Well, some of us would prefer that another person go to bat for us. And if that's how you want to handle this, then you can do it that way. You can go to that chairman or that committee member or someone else to speak in your behalf where you can say, I'm uncomfortable talking one-on-one with the committee, or I really don't have a safe environment to do that, but I've got to have blank and blank and blank, and we're suffering here. And as I read to you the leadership magazine surveys, is that, you've got all these pastors who are just trying to survive. There's not probably much hope of them thriving with their finances, and they don't know how they're going to take care of their family in the future or after retirement. They're just trying to get by day. So you may realize that regardless, you're going to have to speak for yourself to someone if you hope to get the package you need and want. So here's what I think you need to be. I think, first off, you need to be kind through the process. You don't want to be hostile or demanding or combative. You want to be patient. So it may take the church a couple of cycles through this to get their act together and to develop that culture of safety, to get the process done, to get your team put together with the right people, structured in the right way so that they can take care of you. I've been there. I understand the frustration that comes along, and I coach guys on a regular basis, and in confidence they talk to me about these things. So compensation team, let me just tell you, is someone who's got the opportunity to minister in a wonderful way, in a holistic way to your pastoral staff and employees of your church. You got a real chance here to make a difference in your body of believers, in your community, and around the globe by how you treat your laborers that are worthy of their hire. You want to be an example of the believer, Christ-like, one who bears the fruit of the Spirit. You want to be able to listen and not talk the whole time. You want to be someone who is a good example. And I made up a word here. You want to have foresight. So you want to be foresightful. It means that you're looking down the road and understanding the whole package and what God is probably up to, working in the hearts and minds and lives of your compensation team, your leadership team, your church. Get the big picture. And you want to be patient and kind and an example of the believer as you go through this. But also you might be able to teach your people how they should be approaching their employer about their pay package. And as you study and pray through this and come up with a theology of compensation, you might use this as a real teaching time to help your lay people who are out in the rough and tumble world of the business world and are wishing they had more. They're just surviving and not thriving. And they feel underappreciated and underpaid, or not cared for in all the components that are a part of a healthy pay package. So have some foresight here. And by the way, I'm telling you as a pastor how to negotiate. You as a member or the leader of your church's compensation team, these things apply to you as well. They're required of both pastor and parishioner. So as we go through this, how do you negotiate your pay? Well, you need to be a certain way, and then you need to know certain things. So you ready for this? You need to know certain things. You need to understand everyone that is on or a part of the process. So you need to know the process and the formula adopted by your church. Well, needless to say, don't you need to know and understand and agree with the theology of compensation, the formula that you adopt for the baseline, up or down, and what the pieces and parts and applications are? And so the process that you go through, the formula that you use, and you need to understand every player in the process, their shape, S-H-A-P-E, that we went over. You need to know these things. So as you go through, don't go in a dummy. Here's something very important, and if your committee is sitting there and you don't know what you want, you don't know what you need, you don't understand the results of the formula for your own pay package, they're going to look and think, what's the use? How are we supposed to help you? You don't even know what your priorities are. You don't know what you want, what you need, what you'd like to have. You haven't even taken time to look at our process and formula for your own pay package. You're not helping them at all. Well, if you don't show interest in helping them set that, they may sit there and think everything is fine if you don't speak up. Then if you don't help lead the way as the lead pastor or an executive pastor or business manager who's trying to help your church get this put together, you've got to know this. So you need to know what your priorities are. You may say, we need more health benefits or an HSA or FSA fund. This year, we need to contribute more. You think that's a priority for you for some reason. Or I'm going to need blank, and they can move things around in the components. Know what your priorities are. It may be that they say, we can supply you with 4 of the 5 things we want to do this year, but the 5th one's not till next year. Pick one. Or you might reduce this one to increase this one. You need to know what your priorities are. So be aware of the temperaments of everyone involved, the steps of the process, the formula that you have adopted, the theology of compensation. Know how to navigate the culture that you have so you don't step out of line and violate the code of your congregation, who they are in their DNA, the very essence, and you violate the culture because you said some things you shouldn't or took a posture and your nonverbal and verbal communication was just out of place for your church. So as you go through these things, you need to know these things. All right? So here's a footnote summary to this. Don't leave decisions that affect your compensation to chance. Even well-meaning people need your input. Don't feel obligated to leave the room when your compensation is discussed. It is important to negotiate face-to-face so that everyone knows why the compensation decision is what it is. Well, you want to encourage your church and your compensation team to be fair and to compromise with you. Not everyone gets everything they want, probably. You want the decision to be factually based decisions, not just based on personality. So the committee likes one person and doesn't like another, and they give the one they like more money and a little less for the other person. You've got to be careful with that. You ought to foster and build disciples through this process. You want to build healthy relationships. This is a part of serving Christ and making disciples. Don't forget your end game, the Great Commission. So as you go through this, you ought to understand some of these things. Let me just give you some things that mmbb.org, they do retirement planning for pastors. In one of their documents, it's in the resource section and at the close of this as well. But they went through and talked about some things that, pastors say, if I talk about my salary, the committee and the congregation will dislike me if I request a higher salary. Well, people most often appreciate honesty and would rather know how the pastor and the leadership is feeling than deal with unexpressed frustration. Churches have lost pastors because the pastor never spoke up. He didn't include himself in the discussion. Ministers cannot have healthy relationships in a church when they carry a burden of undisclosed hostile feelings. When money issues do emerge, they are usually not the root problem, but a symptom of other issues that should be investigated. People pay more attention to what you do than the salary you request. So be kind and patient, Christ-like, loving, and be concerned for the whole kingdom of God. The second thing they said, pastors say, well, I'm a preacher of the gospel. I shouldn't be occupied with such material concerns. Well, the scriptures acknowledge time and again that church leaders must be cared for and compensated for their labor. Paying a fair wage is one way your congregation acknowledges that it respects its own ordained leaders. While being silent and passive is a negotiating option, it can cause your feelings to emerge in a defensive, in ways that are counterproductive for you to be doing God's work. Third thing, my church is poor. It can't afford to do better. Well, why don't you test that by checking the work that is put out every year and updated with thousands of surveys of churches and church staff, the compensation handbook for church staff, and see what other churches in your area, your size, who meet your similar to yours, what they're currently paying. You want to find out? Look and see. Here's the fourth thing that they say, well, pastors don't want to talk about it because they believe that the church's mission giving will go down if my salary goes up. So they take a view that there's only so much in money in the pot, and if they give me more, there's less to give to missions. And the argument that this article makes is that it's better for a church to support its own ministry than to sacrifice the pastoral leader's salary for wider mission giving. Well, let me give you my personal take on this. Is the pastor the main one who is supporting and paying for your mission outreach outside of your community, however you define missions? Because he hasn't been given a raise or an insufficient raise for the last 5 years, 10 years? And stop and look at that. Well, are you willing to take less pay in your secular job in order to give that extra money? You reduce and increase your giving in order to help missions, right along with your pastor who is involuntarily paying for your missions project because you're not paying him a fair wage. So you want to research this. I just wanted you to know what I think pastors are thinking and what this one group of people put into writing. They also said 3 common misconceptions when churches negotiate pastors' salaries. Number 1, we pay less because the pastor's spouse is a high earner. He or she makes more money. Nowhere else in the working world are employee salaries reduced to account for what a spouse is making in the workplace. Your pastor's efforts are worth no less when they have a spouse who is making a good bit of money. A fair wage should be based on national averages reported, for instance, in the compensation handbook for church staff. But, you know, some churches, they think like that. They want to look at what the spouse is making and try and balance it out so that they're not making such and such. Number two, we can pay less because the pastor has modest needs. Well, the pastor who lives modestly still has to care for his family, and he might be living like that for a reason that you're unaware of. Thirdly, we'll just offer a total compensation amount and let the pastor decide how to allocate it. Well, this is a common mistake that distorts the actual amount a pastor will have for living expenses, and you propose a single large figure that covers salary, benefits, and expenses. This is going to force your pastor to choose between accepting lower take-home pay, waiving his essential benefits, or paying expenses out of pocket. From my perspective, that's not a good way to do that. So as you go through this, you need to make certain that you know and understand everyone in the process. You want to make certain you know what you want, how much you want to should be paid by the formula, what you need, what your priorities are. You want to have agreed upon the process for determining salaries and pay packages and know how it turns out within a range probably when you plug yourself into it. And so whether you're taking the bottom-up approach where you're looking and saying, well, this person is going to make this much money, and here's the bottom line that the pastors are paid, and based maybe on the senior pastor's pay, and then if they have this much education, this many years of experience, this is their position, and you build a formula for that, or you do top-down, and they get a percentage of the senior pastor's pay if they're the associate pastor, assistant pastor, a director of a ministry, you know, part of the facility staff or the support staff, administrative staff, that you're going to figure out some kind of formula to make this work. You do have to talk, but you can do it in such a way that Christ is honored, that no one is offended, but you do have to follow, I think, what I'm telling you here as you go through the process of how to negotiate your pay. So here are some compensation resources that will help you. Just the one that is available today is here at Church Law Today store, and the cost that I found was $34.95. The Minister's Tax Guide is a good guide, and it's by Richard Hammer, who is a well-received expert on the area, and this document is a free resource on it. Then you got Worth's Income Tax Guide for Ministers at this website. This is the cost. Then you have Zondervan's Minister's Tax and Financial Guide. Here's the website and the cost. These are all in the resource section below the video screen here, below the video. And you can pause this, go down, right-click is what I do on my computer, and open a new tab and be able to look at this and shop and compare. But these will give you help. These first three that I'm talking about, the Minister's Tax Guide and these others, these are for the pastor to get and the committee to get to help you package and carry out your tax return. The first one is giving you research, the compensation handbook, and it helps you determine how to fairly compensate compared to thousands of other pastors in the same position and thousands of other churches. And you can look at churches in your area and help you. In order to give this talk, I forgot this one. Carl Herbster and Jim Dewings, two friends of mine, wrote this book years ago, and I talked to you about this. You can get it here. It's not very expensive, I don't think. Then I had some sources that I used. I wanted to make certain I put in front of you, and they're part of the resource section as well. I began with His Sheep, and also I referred to mmbb.org. They put retirement packages together. You're welcome to ask me questions. Be happy to help you. I'm Marshall Shannon, and we're here to help you one-on-one if you need it. You can reach me at either one of these websites or by the email address or either one of the phone numbers, and I trust the Lord will give you his wisdom as you move forward with either negotiating your own package, or if you're a compensation team member, dealing with your staff, so that Christ is honored and the cause of Christ is moved forward. Lord's blessing to you.